Harvey, Bruce, and Mina are arguably my three most successful hybrids, covering each aspect of the land, air, and sea. And the reason why they're so successful is thanks to their ingredients that they use in their genomes. I made sure to use the right contributors that will help create some incredibly optimal, powerful hybrids. But even to this day, a lot of people still use a lot of the wrong ingredients for this. So, after I made my video explaining how to make a hybrid, I figured I would make a few more videos detailing on what to do and what not to do. So here is my list of the top 10 worst creatures to use in your hybrids. There will be some familiar faces, as well as some new ones you might not have even expected. So let's begin this list with woodpecker. Now, let me make one thing clear. Woodpecker is an amazing contributor, but unfortunately, a lot of people end up using it really wrong. See, the main goal for this creature was to utilize its incredibly strong pecking capabilities, to make larger hybrids capable of punching completely through other creatures. But this works only due to a few important factors. First of all, their long tongues, which essentially wrap around the brain to cushion them. But another thing is the brain themselves. The brains of woodpeckers are surprisingly small. But despite that, woodpeckers still have surprisingly good intelligence. Because no, a larger brain could mean the tongue wouldn't be able to cushion it as effectively. This part wasn't in the original script, but recently today, Jurassic Text 30 once again had to violate some things, once again making a whole new competition without asking for anyone's permission and also hiring Master Dragon to be a judge, even though I know for a fact they'd never asked them first. And because of that, as a bit of punishment, I'm going to be looking at their most famous hybrid, Haley, and kinda rip it to pieces a bit, while also saving Zane Reborn a job of having to judge this thing. You know, despite this beautifully drawn looking pterosaur, so looking like it would stand a pretty good chance, in reality, this thing gets glazed more than an apple fritter. This hybrid, despite it looking really good and having some genuinely good abilities, it's not the most optimized pterosaur. Part of that is due to how it uses the woodpecker. It utilizes the same things of, be able to strengthen the neck as well as the skull and the beak, and with that large tongue to cushion impacts. But the addition of the parrot brain means that the tongue is not going to be as effective, which means this hybrid could potentially suffer severe concussions if it tries to peck something. So when going up against something like Team Mimic, it could very easily take out one of them, but it would be left severely dazed and open to attacks from the other. And if she's flying while doing this, then it's a long way down. Now there are two ways to sort of get around this trick. The first one is using the green woodpecker, the species that was just shown, which has the longest tongue of any woodpecker, which should be able to cushion a much larger brain. But the other one, and seemingly the more common yet more unknown one, is not what you'd expect, but comes down to the actual pterosaurs themselves. Not all huge Asdarchids were built the same. Harvey, being based from the Hatzegopteryx, gave him a few extra perks that other large, more famous Asdarchids wouldn't have, such as having a much stronger, robust frame as well as a thicker neck. These thick necks and strong heads were pretty much crucial for these large Asdarchids, since their neck vertebrae had special bracing in them, which allowed them to absorb much greater impacts than a typical Quetz would be able to dish out. This is also a reason why Goji Center's Avimperators work so well, because whilst their intelligence is increased, they do have that reinforced thicker neck thanks to the Cryodraken, another big Asdarchid that's in this sort of group of thick neck, robust Asdarchids. Haley isn't using any of those thick-necked Asdarchids. As you can see from her drawing, that her neck is incredibly thin, thanks to the size increase from the Quetzalcoatlus. So trying to hit at those extreme forces would just likely lead to her breaking her own neck. And even if that didn't happen, then you'd still have to worry about the whole concussion issue, which becomes even worse should she miss her initial target, because then she'd have two combatants going at her. So yeah, Haley is not getting Apex. It does make her good for unique, but that's about as good as it gets. No, Haley is not the apex be-all and end-all of pterosaurs. I mean, Harvey definitely has a bit more contention for that, but then again, you could say that to any of the pterosaurs that make it to apex tier, like Valkyriopteryx and Bessu. Those are in a different league compared to Haley. And yeah, no, and just because she looks good doesn't mean she gets favoritism from anyone. Okay, that segment lasted for way too long, so let's move on to the next one, being mollusks. Specifically, creatures like scalyfoot gastropod and limpets. Another really useful contributor, if you know how to use it right, which most people don't. Scalyfoot gastropod and limpets are meant to provide incredibly strong armour and teeth, based on what they actually have in real life. But people decide to go beyond that, including this sheer amount of pyrite and gophite in all aspects, especially with the limpet. I've seen people use it for not only the teeth, but for the armour and claws. Limpets only have gophite in their teeth, the same way that things like a shrew would only have iron in its teeth. We are able to get iron to other parts of the body, but that's only from the use of the vampire bat. No, limpets would not work in the same way that a vampire bat would, where you can just spread the iron across the body. And plus, having the sheer amount of metal in the body could also make it more likely for the hybrid to suffer from blood poisoning. Now, limiting it to the skin and the teeth could avoid this, but it also helps to have a contributor that would help manage this sheer amount of iron in the body. This next entry is kind of a collection of different animals, which being poisonous animals. This includes things like the blue-ringed octopus, fish like the sarpasulpa, various birds like the hooded pituhui, and the example here, the poison dart frog. Basically, people think that they could just add this to get poisoned skin. That is not how this works. Almost all of these kinds of poisonous animals get their poison from what they eat, which a hybrid is likely not going to have access to in a combat scenario. With something like Bruce, he has poisonous flesh, but that comes from the Greenland shark, which is able to produce it since sharks automatically have to get rid of their waste through their body, which in turn makes their flesh pretty nasty tasting and repulsive to a lot of other creatures. So it works well in this case, but not really in any others. A lot of people probably saw this one coming. The next entry is regenerative animals, including things like zebrafish, lobster, flatworm, or the most common example, the axolotl. Put it simply, the majority of hybrids are used for combat, and people think that by adding this they basically turn their hybrid into Wolverine. They can just instantaneously regenerate damage. But that's not how this works, as regeneration isn't the most useful in combat. It takes days, weeks, or even months for these kinds of creatures to regenerate lost parts. And they'll definitely not have that time to regenerate when they're fighting for their lives. You'd think the biggest animal that's probably ever existed on our planet would be a great contributor. Wishful thinking. The blue whale is arguably one of the worst aquatic contributors you could add in your hybrid. For a couple of reasons. The first one, you may get size, but you'd also get an excess of weight. And an excess of weight means you won't be able to move nearly as quickly, which makes you a much bigger and weaker target to other hybrids. Another reason is energy efficiency. Baleen whales in general are terrible at using their energy. Blue whales won't even open their mouths unless they are sure they're going to get a big enough batch of krill. But then again, other baleen whales actually manage to work better. Humpback whales have more agility thanks to their larger fins, and fin whale basically provides all the benefits of the blue whale, but with much less weight, which works a lot better. Also, some people choose to add the whale organs and size to land animals, which is just opening up a whole another can of worms. Whales are able to get this big because the water acts as a natural buoyant. It helps to hold their weight. And also, marine organs beat a lot slower, which is not good for an animal that needs to have organs beating quite quick in high intense action situations. You know, people use these marine mammals to make their hybrids do well in low oxygen environments. But most of the time, they're not fighting in low oxygen environments. And also, their blood is much thicker than typical land animals, which leads to the blood travelling slower through the arteries. It can't get to the places it needs to quick enough, which leaves the hybrid much less efficient for its energy, even more than what it already is. I talked briefly about this guy in the most recent episode of Bruce's Battles, but yeah, venomous snakes as a whole aren't the best contributors, but the big standout is the spitting cobra. I mean, first of all, snake fangs are really thin and brittle and would likely break in almost any other kind of jaw. Secondly, the snake hood will do almost nothing for intimidation purposes, considering people make their hybrids pretty much fearless with other contributors. And also, the venomous spit is also useless, since not only does it need to be incredibly precise, but it also doesn't even travel that far to begin with. So you're better off just using something else that's venomous. Something that doesn't require breakable fangs, like saliva. This is another sort of group of animals, placoderms. The example here being the Dunkleosteus. There are quite a few issues with this. First of all, the least big issue, the head armor. You may get armor, and very good armor at that, by using it. But if your hybrid is something like a whale or a shark, you may also be blocking the echolocation and electroreception from actually working, meaning your hybrid unable to detect threats as well until it's probably too late. And then there's the obvious issues being in the bite. The bite is very different to other bites, which combining that with other contributors could lead to the hybrid smashing its own face. And also, the whole self-sharpening method doesn't work, because the Dunkleosteus teeth aren't teeth. They're just plates of bone, which are a lot stronger than typical teeth, which means the dunk is able to sharpen them well, but not in another, because, someone asked me this earlier, because yesterday someone asked about the whole dunk for sharpening thing. I said it doesn't work, but then they pointed me to Reiner. Well, Reiner does end up getting hanked from this, because this self-sharpening mechanism would just end up scraping its own face. But then again, Reiner dies from iron poisoning long before that becomes a problem. We're now moving into the top 3, with the number 3rd entry being shrimps. More specifically, things like the pistol and mantis shrimp. You all know exactly why these things are here. Their punches and other quirks have been used as the biggest downfall of a lot of hybrids, some I've even had to cover. To put it short, these creatures are able to punch at these sheer forces due to how they work at the size they're at, which you'll see commonly for some other contributors later on. Basically, trying to upscale this sheer amount of punch on another hybrid would not only not work, but if it did, it would end up completely breaking its own arm. And also the pistol shrimp, people use that for its fast punches, but pistol shrimps don't even punch. They basically just have a gun attached to it. Unless they said the hybrids are supposed to be pinching, which I highly doubt. So yeah, this is really not a good contributor to use. But don't worry, it gets worse. The electric eel. I've been waiting to talk about this for a while. Electric eel, I feel like, does not work in any capacity for a hybrid, and just straight up does not belong in it. There's no purpose for it. I mean, these last two are really like the worst of the worst. I mean, I didn't really say this list would be in any particular order, but these top 2 are definitely the worst of the worst and do not belong on any hybrid. And if I see them on a hybrid, it most likely gets hanked. So first of all, how electric eels actually work. Most of their organs are located in the very front of their body. The rest of it is devoted to the shocks, thanks to all of their densely packed muscle fibers. And also, this electric eels also hurt themselves when they shock. They do have special stuff in place to reduce the damage, but this is thanks to their very simple nervous system. Trying to overcomplicate this nervous system would lead to the hybrid dying from a self-inflicted electric shock. And also, you'll notice electric eels don't have armor, because the armor would basically act as an insulant, trapping the electricity in the creature, and with nowhere for the electricity to go, it would basically tear its way through the creature, killing it. And also, I'll say this now, electric eels may have electroreception, but it's also not as good as shark electroreception. So yeah, there's pretty much absolutely zero reason to ever use electric eel. Just like there's even less reason to use the number 1 entry on this list. The Bombardier beetle. I feel like it's personally the single worst contributor to add in a hybrid. For one key reason, that chemical spray. It only really works specifically due to the size that the Bombardier beetle is at. There are hybrids made in 2026 that still make this mistake. And that, just so you know, trying to scale this hybrid up to be something literally anything bigger than this means that the chemical reaction won't work and will make the hybrid literally explode. Which would be very entertaining, but too bad that the hybrids need to be functional these days. So yeah, Bombardier beetle is by far the worst contributor for any hybrid to be used. So I hope that list will actually maybe help some people to understand what not to use. I may make a video in the future on what to use, some of the more popular contributors for the hybrid war stuff, but that video will have to wait for a while, because there's a lot of hybrid content that will be coming very soon. Now, with the hopefully upcoming roster reveal for the Great Hybrid Tournament, that I'm hoping Mina will enter and be in. And there's also other stuff like episode 4 of the Skybrid Wars likely also coming soon, which I thankfully did Zane Reborn and the judges a job by covering one of the contestants that may be in it, Haley, and also ripping it to pieces a bit, hopefully to teach Jurassic Text a lesson. Except, let's be honest, it most definitely didn't, because they probably didn't understand a word. So, yeah. I will see everyone for the next episode of Bruce's Battles, which will be coming next week. Quite a marathon for Bruce's Battles next week. Hopefully a new episode each and every day. For most of it. You know, there's a lot of hybrids to cover. But will any of them be able to beat the ruler of the seas?